How safe do you think it is to be alone in the forest at night? And what if you realize that you're not actually alone, that something is watching you? Some places may seem like part of nature, but they hold forgotten secrets buried for years. This story will make you think twice before going camping again. My channel is on its way to reaching 100 subscribers. Would you subscribe for free and help me reach 100? Also, let me know in the comments where and at what time you are watching this video. My name is Alex. I'm 26 years old, and hiking and camping have always been a part of my life. Since childhood, my greatest passion has been spending time in places where people rarely go and being alone with nature. But exactly a year ago, I learned that even nature chooses to forget certain places. That weekend, my three friends, Ben, Olivia, and Marcus, and I decided to go camping in the woods. The place we were heading to was an old lakeside location that didn't even have a name on the map. It was called Misty Lake on old maps, but modern sources didn't mention it at all. We didn't know why no one went there, but we would soon find out. The journey to the campsite took a long time. Along the way, we saw nothing, just emptiness and solitude. But when we arrived at the site, the atmosphere felt immediately strange. Normally, camping areas have small signs, remnants of old campfires, or discarded trash. But here, it was as if no one had ever set foot before. The trees were unnaturally dense and eerily silent. No bird sounds, no rustling wind. As if nature had forgotten how to breathe here. We set up our tents, lit our campfire, and started eating. The lake was completely still. There wasn't a single ripple on the surface. As the night deepened, our conversations became more engaging, and soon, midnight had passed. That was when Olivia lifted her phone to check the time. Her expression suddenly changed. "What time does it say?" I asked. "It's 1:15, she whispered. "But just a moment ago, it was 11:30. Do you remember time passing that fast?" We all froze. We weren't playing games or watching movies to lose track of time. How had the hours slipped by unnoticed? None of us could recall exactly what had happened. Even the campfire had almost burned out, as if no one had tended to it for hours. Strange things were happening. I felt a chill run down my spine. That night, everyone was a little uneasy, but no one said it out loud. After a while, we retreated to our tents. But the discomfort inside me kept me awake all night. By morning, an unsettling silence lingered in the air. We decided not to talk about what had happened and tried to enjoy the day by hiking. We planned to cross to the other side of the lake, where an old hunter's cabin was once located, according to the map. However, as we walked, we realized that no matter how far we went, the landscape around us remained the same. The same trees, the same moss-covered rocks. It felt like we were walking in circles. Marcus joked, "This place feels cursed," but his eyes reflected genuine fear. When we finally reached the cabin, we found it in ruins. The door was open, and inside, there was an old camping bed, a broken chair, and strange symbols carved into the floor. But the most disturbing thing was an aged note on the wall. "If you're reading this, leave immediately. They are watching." We stood in stunned silence. Olivia stepped back, trembling. Who is watching?" she whispered. At that moment, we heard a disturbance from the water outside. The surface of the lake rippled violently, as if someone had fallen in. But no one was there. Suddenly, a whisper echoed through the forest. It wasn't just the wind. We could hear faint words, but we couldn't understand the language. By then, fear had fully set in. Staying here for even a few more hours felt dangerous. We decided to head back to our campsite. When we returned, everything seemed untouched. Or so we thought. Olivia opened her backpack and found that all of her belongings were soaked. But we had zipped our bags shut before leaving. The tents were covered in an unusual amount of moisture, as if a heavy mist had settled on us overnight. As night approached, our unease grew. Sitting by the fire, I noticed something on the far side of the lake. A silhouette. Human-like, but not quite. Too tall, too still. "Do you see that?" I whispered. No one moved. We all stared at the same spot, but within seconds, the figure was gone. And this time, the whispers were much closer, right next to our tents, as if murmured directly into our ears. We couldn't take it anymore. We decided to leave immediately, not even bothering to pack our things. Grabbing our flashlights, we ran toward our car. But no matter how much we ran, the path never seemed to end. It was as if the forest didn't want to let us go. At last, we saw the car and jumped inside, speeding away. We don't know what we left behind. But one thing is certain, we will never go near that lake again. After that night, I researched Misty Lake. The only thing I found was its historical connection to missing people. But no records described what had happened there. It was as if it had never existed. But I know. We were there. And they are still there. And sometimes, when I try to sleep, I hear a whisper right next to my ear. "Alex." Is it scarier to get lost in a forest, or to realize you're not alone there? Some places don't even appear on maps because no one wants to remember them. But sometimes, we unknowingly stumble upon things that should have been forgotten. This story will make you think twice before going camping. My channel is on its way to 100 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed yet, would you support me by subscribing for free? Also, don't forget to comment where and what time you're watching this video. My name is Daniel. I'm 27 years old, and I love exploring adventurous places. Being in nature helps me escape the suffocating air of the city. But after what happened last summer, I never want to camp alone again. I usually prefer isolated locations that are rarely visited by people. While browsing through some old maps, I came across a small place called Gray Oak Forest. There was barely any information about it. Just a few old newspaper articles mentioning people who had disappeared there in the 1980s. But I didn't take it seriously. None of my friends were available, so I decided to go alone. I packed my camping gear, food, and of course my camera, and set off toward Gray Oak Forest. After a long and exhausting journey, I was finally nearing the camping site deep in the woods, entering the forest. As I walked deeper into the forest, I noticed something strange. The trees looked dead. Normally, forests are full of life, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind. But here, there was only silence. It was as if the world had forgotten this place. I took out my phone. No signal. "Great," I muttered to myself. Still, I pressed on and eventually found a decent spot to set up camp. I pitched my tent and started a small fire. As the afternoon passed, I decided to explore the forest. But after a few hours of walking, I realized something disturbing. I kept ending up in the same place. I marked a tree and started walking again. But a few minutes later, I was standing right in front of the same tree. That was impossible. I checked my watch. 6:45 p.m. I needed to get back before dark. But when I returned, my campsite wasn't there. Lost and the whispers. I tried not to panic. Maybe I had lost my sense of direction. But the deeper I walked into the forest, the stranger things became. The tree trunks had weird carvings on them, ancient symbols, names scratched into the bark. Some were incomplete, but one caught my attention. "They know you're here." The moment I read it, I heard a whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the words were clear. It sounded like someone was calling my name. "Daniel." The second I heard it, I ran back toward my camp. But no matter how fast I ran, it felt like I was running in circles. Then, I saw something, a flickering light. My campfire. I sprinted toward it, relieved. But when I got there, my tent was open, and my belongings were scattered around, as if someone had gone through them. On the ground, there was a new message. Don't sleep at night. Nightfall and shadows. It was 10:30 p.m. now. I sat by the fire, listening carefully. Despite my fear, I had no choice but to wait until morning. Then, I noticed a pathway that I didn't remember seeing before. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously walked down the path. But after just a few steps, I tripped over something. I fell to the ground, and as I brushed away the dirt, my hands touched something solid. It was an old, rusty metal box. I hesitated, then pried it open. Inside, I found a few strange items. An old pocket watch. A faded photograph. The man in it was someone I didn't recognize. A folded note. With trembling hands, I opened the note and read it. If you found this box, it's already too late. They have seen you. At that moment, I heard breathing. Behind me. I froze. I didn't want to turn around. But whatever was there wasn't waiting for me to look. I felt a hand on my back. Cold, stiff, and unnatural. And then, everything went black. I woke up to sunlight. But I wasn't next to my tent. I was lying on the side of a road, miles away from the forest. I had no idea how I got there. My bag, my supplies, everything was gone. I turned back to look at the forest. But now, it looked different. And the most terrifying thing, there was a folded note in my pocket. We let you go, but never come back. I left immediately. After that day, I tried researching Gray Oak Forest again, but I couldn't find anything about it. It was as if it had never existed. But I know the truth. I was there. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear a whisper. Daniel. What do you think happened to me that night? Was it real, or just my imagination? Comment your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel and support me. Do you believe that the wilderness is truly empty at night? What if you realized that something has been watching you all along? Some places may seem like part of nature, but they hold secrets that should have never been forgotten. This story will make you think twice before planning your next camping trip. My name is Daniel. I'm 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, camping and hiking have been my greatest passions. There's something about being deep in nature, away from the noise of civilization, that always made me feel at peace. But one particular trip changed everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. It was a late autumn weekend when my two friends, Ethan and Rachel, and I decided to camp near Black Hollow Lake, a secluded spot that very few people knew about. I had read about it in an old hiking guide, and something about its remote location intrigued me. When I suggested it, both Ethan and Rachel were immediately on board. We packed our gear and set off, expecting nothing more than a quiet weekend in the woods. The drive took longer than expected, winding through narrow forest roads that seemed untouched by time. By the time we reached the lake, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the still water. The place was eerily beautiful, too quiet, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Setting up camp went smoothly, but there was something unsettling about the atmosphere. There were no signs that anyone had been here before us. No old fire pits, no footprints, nothing. It was as if the place had never been touched by human presence. We brushed off the feeling and continued with our night, lighting a fire and sharing stories under the star-filled sky. At around midnight, Ethan noticed something odd. Guys, do you hear that? We fell silent. At first, I thought he was imagining things, but then I heard it too, a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the other side of the lake. It wasn't the sound of an animal or the wind against the trees. It was deliberate, like someone knocking on wood in a slow, calculated pattern. Rachel shivered. Maybe it's just a tree branch moving in the wind. But there was no wind. The sound continued for another minute, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. We tried to laugh it off, pretending it was nothing, but none of us felt at ease. Eventually, we decided to call it a night and retreated to our tents. I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear faint whispers just beyond the fabric of my tent, indistinct and hushed, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. I told myself it was my imagination, that the eerie silence of the forest was playing tricks on me. Then, sometime deep into the night, I heard footsteps circling our campsite. They were slow, calculated, heavy enough to not belong to a small animal, but too light to be from a bear. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, holding my breath. The steps moved around, stopping just outside my tent. I mustered the courage to whisper, "Ethan? Rachel?" No response. Then I saw the shadow. Something large and humanoid stood outside my tent, its silhouette barely visible against the dim light of our dying fire. It wasn't moving, but it was there, watching. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was just my paranoia. When I finally dared to open them again, the shadow was gone. But the feeling of being watched never left. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When we finally emerged from our tents, we were all visibly shaken. Rachel looked pale. Did anyone else hear something? Ethan nodded slowly. Footsteps. And voices. I exhaled sharply. I saw something. We didn't need to say anything else. We all knew we had to leave. Quickly packing up our gear, we made our way back to the car. But as we reached the edge of the campsite, something caught my eye. There, on the trunk of a nearby tree, were 3 deep claw marks, fresh, as if made just hours ago. We never spoke about that night again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet place, I swear I can still hear it, that slow, rhythmic tapping. Waiting.